I do, because if what you're saying is that John Calvin quoted the church fathers, which I grant you, yes, he did, and it wasn't just John Calvin. You had Luther, Zwingli, many of the reformers, John Knox, for example, many of the reformers would have quoted the early church. I grant that absolutely, but what you're saying is you're saying that there's no real issue with them doing this. I say there is an issue because they're quoting them as if they agree with them, but what they are doing is they are coming to very different conclusions to the early church fathers, the ones they quote. For example, do you know any of the ones that John Calvin, off the top of your head, quoted from?
Well, he quoted Augustine a lot.
Augustine, exactly. This is what I'm getting at. So that's exactly my point. He quotes from Augustine. Now, Augustine was not some kind of proto-Calvinist reformer. Augustine would have held to doctrines that you would believe would be heresy. So how can you say
Right,
that
and
John
likewise,
Calvin?
fully respectfully,
Hold on.
likewise, you too.
How can you say that John Calvin consistently quotes Augustine? Okay, in a consistent manner when Augustine, to John Calvin, if he's going to be consistent, would be considered a heretic. Augustine believed in Eucharistic adoration. He believed in the papacy. He believed in baptismal regeneration. He believed in the necessity of keeping tradition. He believed in all of this. He believed in intercession of the saints, the real presence of the Eucharist. Many of these things,
Right.
Calvin, as well as especially Luther, would consider heretical and false. Hence the Reformation.
Well, actually, Luther believed in baptismal regeneration and many things that Augustine taught. And I would just like to say, I don't see any dilemma because there are a lot of things that Augustine taught that you would find very much heretical. So, I mean, if you want to
Such
use
as?
this logic, I can. Oh, a lot of things. He
Such as?
explicitly taught on double predestination. He taught that unbaptized babies go to hell. He taught, Augustine was the father of what we know as predestination as we know it today, right? The bondage of the will is what Luther heavily was influenced by Augustine.
But that's the point.
You know,
That's the point. Even though, yeah, you're right. Augustine does have I would say, an off view in terms of predestination, but that doesn't mean we discount
right.
him. It doesn't mean we discount him as a church father. In the same way, modern day Catholics today can still hold to Catholic theology, but they can in fact be wrong on an aspect of certain teachings. That's fine.
So,
1 second.
so you're saying I
What,
can use the same
no,
logic
what,
against you?
no, what I'm saying is that doesn't pose a problem for me. I can say individual church fathers can be orthodox in their teaching in the fundamentals, but they can be off on like a secondary issue, such as predestination. I don't see how that argument holds water. But the difference is, I wouldn't condemn him as a heretic for holding that particular view. We don't do that. We don't. In fact, predestination is a hard topic that people can disagree on within the Catholic Church. In your perspective, those things I referenced that he does hold, you would have to, by necessity, call him a heretic. For example,
No, I would not.
okay,
call him
so
a heretic.
do you believe Eucharistic adoration is a heresy, is idolatry?
Well, define what you mean by heresy, because I mean there's a lot of different interpretations of it. I think it's false. I wouldn't necessarily call it heretical because I just wouldn't go as far as to say that.
Well, okay, so are you a Reformed Baptist or a Presbyterian?
I am Dutch Reformed,
Okay.
so under the category of Presbyterian.
Yes. Okay. Okay. So if someone in your church was adoring the Eucharist, okay, would they be reprimanded for that, or would that be allowed? That would not be allowed, would it?
No, of course not.
Exactly. So it's a wrong teaching. Yes.
And yeah, it is a wrong teaching, but I wouldn't condemn them as a heretic.
You wouldn't. Okay. So if the bread and wine is not really the body, blood, etc., of Christ, okay, if it's not really this, then to adore this would be to be adoring someone, giving something adoration that is not God. That would be considered idolatry. Would you agree?
In some way, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So if this is idolatry, would you admit, is a damnable heresy, considering what we read in the Old Testament?
Well, I'm sure you wouldn't call it idolatry, would you?
No, I'm speaking from your paradigm. So from your perspective, okay, would you agree? We both agree idolatry in the Old Testament is condemned as a damnable heresy, okay?
Right.
If for example, Augustine is adoring something that is not actually Christ and it's just simply bread and wine, would you agree that is a damnable heresy? Based upon the Old Testament teaching, to be consistent, you would have to say yes.
Well, yeah. Again, I just said it's a false doctrine,
Okay.
but I don't believe Augustine was in and of himself a heretic. Although there is many inconsistencies in his teachings, but I wouldn't consider him a heretic.
So would you not say, so would you say that the Israelites adoring the golden calf, they are adoring something that is not God, therefore they were severely punished and actually in danger of hellfire? Would you agree?
Of course.
Okay, so the same thing applies here. If Augustine, is adoring something that is not God, he is, let's say worshipping the bread and wine, as you say, yeah. If that's the case, he's adoring something that's not God. He's giving adoration to that which is not God, therefore that's heresy. And just like the Israelites and the golden calf, they was adoring that, they were condemned. They was in trouble.
There's a big difference here.
No, hold on. What I'm saying, no, there's no difference, because let's put it like this. If, for example, those Israelites, they were adoring the golden calf, as we both agree they were doing, if they died in that state, would they go to hell?
Well, of course, yeah.
Okay, thank you. So this is what I'm getting at. Because they would go to hell in that instance, because they died in unrepentant adoration of something that was not God, then by consistency, if you are going to be consistent, you would have to say that if Augustine was adoring something, for his whole entire life, unrepenting, and died in that state, and he was adoring something that was not God, you would have to say he's in hell. But you won't do that because you're being inconsistent, because he agrees with one aspect of your theology. Therefore, you're trying your best to hold on to Augustine, when I'm saying Augustine certainly was not a Calvinist, or in any way, shape, or form a proto-Protestant. You would have to condemn him as a damnable heretic.
Well, again, you're presupposing, due to that analogy, that the Eucharist is some kind of false god. You're comparing the golden calf with the Eucharist. I don't condemn that as, or I don't see that. I don't see that anything relevant.
But you should,
right? Augustine wasn't worshiping a golden calf, was he?
No, but the problem is,
he was worshiping something that he believed to be the real blood and bread. The real bread, body and blood of Christ.
Okay, so what Augustine was doing,
that wouldn't be idolatry.
Hold on, but what Augustine is doing, he is adoring something. Do you believe the bread and wine is literally the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist? Yes or no? Or do you believe it's symbolic?
I wouldn't necessarily adhere to either one of them.
So you wouldn't agree it's the real body, blood, divinity of Christ in the Eucharist?
No? If you're talking about transubstantiation, then no.
Okay, so if this is not the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist, it's merely bread and wine, In the same way, if that golden calf is not really divine, it's simply a golden calf. So when they adore the golden calf, they are damned as heretics according to you. But when Augustine, in your paradigm, I'm not saying it's heresy, I'm saying in your paradigm, to be consistent, you would have to say what Augustine is doing here is a similar thing to what the Israelites were doing. They was giving adoration to something which is not God and not divine in any way, shape or form. Therefore, that's worshipping something other than God, which is a damnable heresy. The commandment says, do not take any other gods before me. So you would have to say Augustine is guilty of that in terms of Eucharistic adoration, but you won't do that. So what I'm saying you're being inconsistent, and what you're doing is, all due respect, buddy, is when you say, you're comparing the Eucharist to the golden calf, I would never do such a thing in my paradigm.
Well, you're doing such a thing right now.
Allow me to finish. In my paradigm, I would never do such a thing. I would never say that from my perspective, but I'm speaking simply from your perspective, because from your perspective, those two acts are one and the same. It's adoring something other than God. Whether Augustine believed it to be the real presence or not is irrelevant, because if you believe it's not, and Augustine did, you would have to say Augustine is committing idolatry.
Again, I see this very, very big stretch in these two comparisons. Again, just because he adores the Eucharist, I would not condemn him as a heretic. I'm not sure how... I find it illogical to compare the golden calf with the Eucharist. Again, there are certain aspects of the Eucharist that I do agree with. I'm not saying it's an entirely false doctrine. It's a doctrine straight from the devil. I'm not saying that, which is why I wouldn't dare to compare it with worshiping a golden calf. Aside from the fact that this is really almost completely irrelevant to what we're talking about sola scriptura.
So I'll explain what I mean, and then we'll just get back into the topic. So basically what I'm saying is that if you do not condemn Augustine for adoring something that is not God, but you do condemn the Israelites for adoring something that is not God, you are being inconsistent based upon your love for Augustine. Which, what I'm saying is, if you was to be consistent, okay, you'd have to condemn the pair of them for doing a similar act. But of course, you're not doing that. So I think maybe I would say that's an inconsistency on your part. Maybe we should just leave Augustine and as you say, get back to let's get back to the Bible. How about that?